Hey, you clicked on my video. Appreciate it. Now be sure to like the video and subscribe to the page. Long enough to cover the subject and short enough to keep it interesting. Welcome to Out Up My League. I'm Nick Diaz. In the span of 2 days, LSU went from the 37th recruiting class to the 15th ranked recruiting class. And currently now they're in the top 10 overall on the On3 consensus rankings. It's amazing how much a narrative can change. Because here's the thing. People are so obsessed with narratives, crafting them, writing them, believing this or that. The politicians who can tell the best story, they usually win. The columnist who sells the most clicks usually tells the best story. The TV show with the best story is usually the most popular. But the most popular narrative people love is the unwritten narrative. The story that is yet to be told, because your imagination runs wild. What's going to happen next? Tune in next week to see what happens. It's a conspiracy theory. We need to uncover the truth. We love that shit. And Brian Kelly's narrative right now at LSU is not even finished with chapter 1. But everyone is already trying to finish the damn book. But I told y'all last week, chill out when it comes to recruiting. Chill out, especially when it comes to the state of Louisiana recruiting. Now, you don't judge much in recruiting in June and July, like I said, so I'm not going to contradict myself by overreacting to all the positive stuff that happens in June and July. The point is, be patient. Not everything is as it seems. There could be a third act twist that you and I don't know about yet. There could be no third act twist at all. Point is, be patient. Now, these 4 defensive linemen that LSU picked up this weekend, I won't go through all their numbers because, quite frankly, I've only seen a couple of highlights from them this weekend. I don't know. I know they're all very highly ranked, some of them with inside the top 100. But they're all out-of-state defensive linemen. One from Minneapolis, Minnesota, one from Baltimore, one from Georgia, and one from Indianapolis. Where are all the LA defensive linemen? Where are all the Louisiana guys? See, Brian Kelly's not recruiting Louisiana. Well, that's because there are no SEC caliber defensive linemen in the state this season. You had to go out of state. It's a very, very strange and unusual year in recruiting for the state of Louisiana. Very strange. So, once again, people writing the narrative without knowing the full context. There's a reason why they went out of state for this recruiting class. Also, this is a credit to having a guy like Jamar Cain as your defensive line coach for your first year on campus, because he's been a mostly national recruiter at Oklahoma and Arizona State the past 4 years. And that's benefited LSU this cycle specifically. But another lesson to take from all of this is the fact that relationships still do matter. So Jamar Cain emphasized that today, this morning on the Jordy Culotta show, which is something that I've been trying to re-emphasize this entire time, that relationships still do matter, and they take time, even in the age of NIL. The first thing Jamar Cain said this morning is, this didn't happen over the last couple of months. I've been recruiting those kids since they were sophomores in high school. I know that's going to be hard for a lot of us to accept, especially when it comes to the high school players in Louisiana, but all of that still matters, even in the age of name, image, and likeness. Now, I'm not judging anything Brian Kelly does in state until next year for the 2024 class. If this is still a concern the next cycle, then we can all freak out. Until then, I'm not even going to have a discussion, which by the way, we've got 6 months until the December signing period. 6 months. You saw this past 4th of July holiday, a lot can happen in over a week, and a hell of a lot more can happen in 6 months. Now, another thing that people keep on asking me, specifically LSU fans, and even people across the nation, is why does Notre Dame have the number 1 recruiting class in the country as soon as Brian Kelly leaves? Well, I've never followed Notre Dame recruiting before, but just for you, I did this time. So 2 things that go into that right now. One, Notre Dame people have said this as part of the reason. So this is not necessarily my opinion. This is their opinion. Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, his little stunt last year with the Minnesota Vikings about calling and then thinking he was going to get the job and saying he was leaving and then coming back and realizing, wait, I don't actually have the job. That currently, has Michigan ranked second to last in the Big Ten. And it's not because they haven't gotten recruits, it's because they've lost recruits that were flipped to Notre Dame, or the ones that were leaning towards Michigan or Notre Dame have now committed to Notre Dame over Michigan. Because Notre Dame and Michigan have always recruited the same guys. Well, when you retain your entire staff at Notre Dame outside your head coach and your special teams coordinator, and Jim Harbaugh pulls this stunt where nobody really can trust him anymore, that's what you have. Secondly, they have 19 commits. 19 commits in the summer. As compared to most schools, most, blue blood schools, that's kind of a lot. So really, it's more of an attrition thing than anything else. That's why Northwestern is in the top 10. That's why Texas Tech was in the top 10 for so long. I think they're now number 11. They will not finish that come season's end. And Notre Dame will not have the top-ranked recruiting class once again. Notre Dame will probably finish in the top 10 like they have the past 2 seasons under Brian Kelly. But more specifically, when you look at their recruiting class, you look at who they have committed. All of their top recruits are offensive linemen and defensive linemen. They are still very weak at the skill player position, specifically wide receiver. It's a big hole in their recruiting class right now. Well, what was Notre Dame known for when Brian Kelly was there? Tight ends, obviously, offensive linemen, and defensive linemen. They could stack up NFL-wise with those players, but they lacked skill players on the outside. A thing that Brian Kelly has said multiple times in interviews since leaving Notre Dame, that was the ultimate reason why Notre Dame struggled in big games against Clemson and Alabama and Ohio States of the world. That was, he says, we were always just a couple skill players away from really competing in those games. Well, at LSU, he saw they produce in the state of Louisiana and all throughout the South. You don't have trouble getting those types of players. Not to mention, it's easier to keep all those recruits intact at Notre Dame when you only have one staff member you lost in Brian Polian, and the rest of them are still there. So you aren't starting from ground one, as opposed to LSU where you only retained one coach from the previous staff. So you're basically starting from ground zero. Context matters if you write the narrative. I'm also not going to take one recruiting year at any school and say, well, that's how it's going to be from going on forward. Let me put it to you this way. Y'all realize it took Nick Saban, his third recruiting class at LSU, his third, to finally crack the top 10 recruiting rankings? His third year. It's a long process that people don't want to wait for, but it's just like kind of like baseball. If you use a baseball analogy, a 300 batting average in 5 months is way more impressive than batting 300 in 1 month. So take that for what you will. Now, currently, where does LSU stand with some of Louisiana's top recruits that are currently uncommitted? Because that's still important. I will tell you that Shelton Sampson Jr., the 5-star number 1 wide receiver in the state, number 2 overall player, Caleb Jackson, the number 1 running back in the state, and Zalance Hurd, the number 1 offensive tackle in the state, they are all heavy LSU leans, and they could commit very soon, within the next couple of months. Because every recruiting site prediction, every person that I've talked to that covers Louisiana high school football, they come in every single day saying they're going to LSU. They're heavy LSU leans. Now, as far as out-of-state is concerned, I don't really know. I don't follow. There's too much new out-of-state stuff going on. Other than one of the top offensive tackles in the country from New Jersey is a heavy LSU lean. He can go right now, but other than that, I'm not sure. And plus, by the way, when it comes to recruiting rankings, I know there was a huge debate going on about which recruiting site is the best, especially with the emergence of On3 Sports. So I'll tell you what I do, all right? I'll just tell you what I do. You can take it for what it's worth. But before On3 Sports came around this year, I always followed 247 because they had proven, this was proven by statistics, that they had the most accurate predictions and rankings based on NFL draft picks every single year the past 5 or 6 or 7 years. So that's what I always went with. But in reality, what I do now, and really what I started to do before On3 came around, is look at the consensus rankings. Specifically, I look at On3 consensus rankings because that's a much more accurate measurement of all recruits, because they take every single major recruiting site, Rivals, Scouts, ESPN, 247, their own rankings on On3, every major recruiting site, and they put together all the averages of the rankings, and they pop out and see what your average ranking is over 4 or 5 national sites. Look, all sites and scouts, they all have their strengths, they all have their biases, and that's why consensus rankings are the way to go for me. That's for me. You do what you want. But I've been following On3's site for the past couple of months now, really only because of several things. Their website is easier to maneuver. They're not slow. They keep up to date with all of their crystal ball predictions or On3 site predictions for players more often than 24/7 has done. I mean, I saw one recruiting site, I won't say which one it was, that had Bill Bush still as the secondary recruiter for Derek Williams to LSU. Dude was fired 2 years ago. And these are some of the people help writing the narrative. As I said, things take time. Thanks for listening to Out of My League. If you like what you heard, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Or follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok in the description link below.